Welcome. This is the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show on April 27th, 2023. It's our 145th episode. My name is Andy Z. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, California. The RNL Revolution Nothing Less show is a show about the world and for a radically new and far better world through a real revolution. We expose and dig deep into the roots of the problem that the people here and around the world face, and we bring to life the solution through a real revolution to emancipate humanity. Every week, we bring the science, the leadership, and the ethos brought forward by the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian for that new society and new world. We aim to provoke, to challenge, and to inspire you to be a part of the most urgent, most hopeful thing that you could do and be a part of. My co-host of the RNL Show, Sansara Taylor, won't be with us this week because she is speaking tonight at Revolution Books in Berkeley, California on Woke Lunacy versus Real Revolution. And Sansara will be giving a similar talk at UCLA on May 24th, so mark your calendar and come out if you're in or can get to Los Angeles then. The last segment of today's show will be a conversation about going out and struggling with one and all at the universities about woke lunacy versus real revolution. The RNL Revolution Nothing Less show is a program produced by the Revcoms, revolutionary communists who have taken up the new communism developed by the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, B.A. B.A. is a revolutionary who bases himself on the scientific understanding that the capitalist imperialist system must be overthrown and replaced with a radically new and far better system aimed at overcoming all forms of oppression and exploitation. He's written the blueprint to achieve this in the Constitution for the new socialist republic in North America. B.A. insists that the revolution's goal must not be revenge, but the emancipation of humanity all over the world. You're going to get to experience B.A. a few times in today's program, speaking to a huge audience in 2014 at Riverside Church in New York City, and then in an excerpt from the interview that we did on the RNL Show with him this past fall. The heart of today's RNL Show is Internationalist May Day 2023. Today's episode airs just 4 days from May 1st, so we're going to devote most of the program to May Day, and then the last segment will be about that conversation that takes on the woke lunacy that pervades the culture and the movements of today. We begin with a portion of the talk that Noche Diaz, the spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs nationally, gave at an organizing picnic that the Revolution Club and the Revcoms held in this past Sunday here in Los Angeles. And then after that, I'm going to speak with Raymond Lotta about the looming danger of war and the importance of May Day this year in opposing that war as part of preparing for a real revolution. And then there's more from Bob Avakian and Michelle Chai, a leader of the LA Revolution Club. So let's get with it now, beginning with Noche Diaz.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Michelle. I am a leader in the Revolution Club here in Los Angeles. We're here a week from May 1st. We are going to get out there in the streets, as our call puts it. We, the Revcoms, call on you to stand up, to join us representing and calling on others on Monday, May 1st, to send this message to the world that in these dark times, we are building a force to bring forward thousands and then millions into a movement for an actual revolution.
Look again at this poster. And when it says, we refuse to accept this system's future, a better world without oppression and exploitation is possible. No U.S.-NATO war with Russia. Stop U.S. threats against China. No World War III. It's this system, not humanity, that needs to become extinct. Now is the time to get organized for a real revolution. International May 1st, take to the streets across this country. And think about this image, or if you've had a chance to look at the stickers and look at that beautiful artwork of the globe, this abstraction of the planet that we live on. And you step outside of the day-to-day of what it means to go through this system and to go through this life. You step outside, just another protest or event to an event. where you're constantly scrambling to catch up with all the horrors carried out by this system. Step outside of that for a second and think about refusing to accept this system's future and boldly asserting that a better world without oppression and exploitation is possible, and standing the way that image does in that poster, defiantly against this system's future and projecting the possibility of a different, far better future. This is what we are doing on May 1st. There are millions and millions of people just like us all across this country, and even more all across this world, who are also living under this system, with the weight of everything it means to live under this system, to feel like there's no hope for the future, to figure out a way to just go out for yourself going through this system, or to have it carve out a space for yourself to ignore what is going on all around you because you can, especially in this country that lives and feeds off the rest of the world. There are tens of millions of people just like us who could be, need to be, and that we have a plan to transform into a revolutionary people. Not 10 years from now, not 100 years from now, not 5 years from now. We have to do this starting now and making real leaps next week. It doesn't look like this all the time, but all the shit that Michelle was talking about that started off this year, string of murders right here in LA, day 1 and 2, by the police against black and brown people. Further leaps in the attack on women's right to control their own body, on birth control, as well as abortion. Further leaps in all these deals that are being made to further plunder the environment, moving tactical nuclear weapons throughout Eastern Europe, and the constant escalation of the potential for World War III between the U.S., NATO on the one hand, and Russia, as well as China, that the U.S. has in their crosshairs. All of this is part of a whole world situation that is coming together, and especially in this country where those who rule over us, who usually got their shit together enough to agree on how they're going to rule over and oppress the masses of people by sharing power, they're at each other's throats, okay? They're fighting even among the Republicans, Democrats, they're fighting even amongst themselves. And those tens of millions of people who normally put up with all this are going to have to confront the way in which this society is coming apart in ways they don't normally have to. They can actually be woken up through struggle in a way that they can't always be. Again, not just in the thousands, not just in the tens of thousands, but in the millions. This can be part of how they become a revolutionary people, not in some far-off distant future, but in the time we're in now. One side of the rulers is preparing for a civil war, folks. This is not something we just say to scare people and get them joining into the revolution. Watch the Revolution Nothing Less show. They laid this out. How Trump gets on Fox News in these interviews with this clown, Tucker Carlson, telling people, don't put your AR-15s away just yet. They're preparing their side of the equation for a civil war. We have to be preparing not for a civil war, but for a revolution to put an end to this system. And this year we have to make a leap in that. And once more, just on this question of hope and possibility. Because people need to know not only that there's a place to go to fight against the things that they're outraged by. People need to know not only that they have a revolution club that they can join. People need to know that they have a leader like Bob Avakian, and not these posers and clowns who tell people to go along with this system, like Andrew Tate telling men how to be real men, or Kanye West telling people all kinds of craziness, or the Ice Spices and the Beyoncés telling women to own their oppression and get in on it. People need to know they have a leader like Bob Avakian who's telling them the truth about what it's going to take to put an end to this system and get everybody free, and that he's written a constitution for the way we can run shit. We don't have to live this way. And it's not just a dream to do things differently. We have a plan. We have leadership that's mapped out how we can do this. And what's in the way is this system. But once we get it out of the way, It's not just good intentions that we can start acting on. There's a plan, there's a vision, there's a program, there's a concrete understanding of why we can't do it under this system and how we are going to do it under a new system. So when we're acting on May 1st together throughout the country like this, we're sending a beacon throughout the world. Not only is this a time when revolution becomes more possible, but this is a time that we are determined, together with the masses of people, to seize on. To actually build up the forces to defeat those who rule over us. To abolish this system and their constitution, which was written by slave owners and oppressors. And to establish a new society based on this constitution that Bob Avakian has written. This is what we're beginning with May 1st. This is what we, everyone here, can be part of representing for on May 1st. And again, we know what we're up against. What we don't always appreciate is how much we got going for us to solve and to, go to work on what we don't have. And again, it's not just those of us that you met in the church who are already with this. It's all of you who can't stand the way the world is. Everyone who is sick and tired of seeing people treated as less than human beings. Everyone who knows the freedom and justice of this country is a cruel lie. Everyone who sees that to be young in this world today means having no decent future or no future at all. Everyone who's got heart to fight for something worth fighting for. Everyone who needs to be challenged to become part of this revolution. There's a need and a way, and a time for you is now. And this year, not only are we putting this on the map so that people know about it, we have to build a force that is acting in a way unlike even how we have been acting for too long in the revolution. We are serious in 2023 about setting a different example. Building this force as something that is actually fighting the power and transforming people for revolution. Going up against not just protesting the crimes, but leading people to defend each other from the increasing ways this system comes down through its police murder, terror, and brutality, as well as its thugs in and out of uniform, carrying out all kinds of terroristic attacks against people. People need to know we don't have to lay down and accept this system's future and those who want to make it even worse. We are getting ready for a real revolution, and we have the strategy, the plan, and we are getting organized to do that. This May 1st. We're doing that in the streets. This is the message I wanted to share with you, folks.
That was Noche Diaz speaking at the pre-May Day picnic in Los Angeles this past Sunday. On Internationalist May Day 2023, we march and we stand for the interests of the people all over the world. Our marches and gatherings will be serious and real about revolution in this country. For that to be true, the second and third slogans for May 1st are of tremendous importance at this moment. They are: no U.S.-NATO war with Russia. Stop U.S. threats against China. No World War III. It's this system, not humanity, that needs to become extinct. These two slogans focus up the rapidly developing existential stakes confronting us. They sharply state what must be the stand for anyone objectively looking at the present danger of war and the dangerous course that the rulers of this system have put us on. So to get into this, I'm going to be speaking with a frequent guest of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show, Raymond Lotta, who is an advocate for the new communism, a follower of Bob Avakian, and a spokesperson for Revolution Books in New York. But first, I'm going to conduct 2 quizzes with all of you who are watching. So grab a piece of paper, grab a pen, and the first of these quizzes is from a pop quiz that the Revcoms have been taking out to college campuses. But in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you just one of the 4 questions from this quiz. You can see the whole quiz on revcom.us. And if you are watching the premiere on Thursday evening of this show. Put your answer in the chat, and if you're watching later on, put your answers in the comments. So here it is. Here's the third question from the quiz we took out to the campuses recently. The International Criminal Court, known as the ICC, issued an arrest warrant for President Vladimir Putin of Russia, charging him with war crimes. Biden said, quote, he's clearly committed war crimes. I think it's justified, end quote. Which of the following statements is true? A, America does not have a history of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. B, America has been a proud signatory to the ICC since the court was established in 2002. C, America has turned over generals and presidents for trial who have ordered and presided over such crimes as the murder of 2 million Vietnamese, the invasion and occupation of Iraq based on lies, illegal detentions at Guantanamo military prison, and systematic torture is carried out at the Abu Ghraib military prison in Iraq. And then, last, D, the U.S. is not even a signatory to the International Criminal Court and has opposed the ICC precisely because it could subject U.S. presidents, officials, generals to war crimes, investigations, and trials. So now mark down A, B, C, or D and put it in the chat or in the comments. The second quiz is this. Last week, Raymond Lotta and a member of the New York City Revolution Club took this pop quiz about the war over Ukraine and the role of U.S. imperialism to political science students at Columbia University. Now, here comes the second quiz, just for you watching, even though you can find it on revcom.us. When Raymond Lotta, here we go, when Raymond Lotta and the Rev Club gave this quiz to these political science students, which of the following four things do you think happened? A, they tapped into a deep vein of critical thinking, as the students were not so ready to buy into U.S. rationalizations. B, the room was evenly divided as to whether the U.S. was acting in a greatly beneficial or extremely dangerous way. C, all hell broke loose as the majority of the class and the professor were ideologically committed to the idea that the U.S. was a force for good in this conflict. And D, we were invited back to explore these issues further. The correct, and frankly dismaying answer is C. All hell broke loose with most of the class and the professor ideologically committed to the idea that the U.S. is a force for good. So just pause on that for a minute. These junior or senior undergraduates and the professor at this top liberal university showed themselves to be strident supporters of the U.S. military involvement in Ukraine. Think again about the import of what we are calling on all of you to do on May Day in getting out with the message of those two slogans I just read. So keep this in mind as we get into this with Raymond Lotta. Welcome, Raymond.
I'm really glad to be back on the show with you and your audience.
Raymond, you wrote a letter about this experience to revcom.us. So could you briefly set the scene, the mood, and the tenor of this discussion, this classroom discussion?
Yeah, so I came into the class. The professor originally said that she had to leave and she would leave the class to me to conduct the pop quiz about the war over Ukraine. So she asked me, well, what's your position on this? And I quickly explained that this is not a war for democracy against autocracy, but rather this is a war in which the U.S. is using the Ukrainian people as cannon fodder to further its strategic and geopolitical interest. And then she said, I'm not leaving, I'm staying. And I handed the quiz out and the students began looking through the questions, and then they began to pile on saying, how could you say this about what America is doing? How can you say this about the Ukrainian people being used as cannon fodder when this is a just and noble battle that our neighbors are under attack, and you're saying this? And that was the beginning of a very sharp and contentious discussion and debate in the room. Is the U.S. the good guy in this conflict and the good guy in the world, Or, as I was explaining, and people were not willing to listen closely because it was touching a raw nerve of their embrace of the idea that the U.S. can do no wrong when it comes to something as essential as the defense of democracy in a country like Ukraine, which is how the U.S. media apparatus and the U.S. government has presented it. So I have to say, Andy, that I was, as you mentioned, I was dismayed myself by the degree to which people had imbibed this idea, this chauvinist idea, that the U.S. represents this force for good in the and very uncritical embrace of that at a university where people are supposedly being instilled in the value of critical thinking. So that was the way it kicked off. This professor stayed, and people were loudly going at this with me about what is the character of this war. And it might be good to listen to what Bob Avakian says about what he calls the great tautological fallacy, which is precisely what was influencing and, I must say, distorting people's understanding of the world and what the U.S. role and position in the world is.
In confronting and moving to prevent this, one of the biggest obstacles standing in the way and weighing people down is American chauvinism. The disgusting notion that America and Americans are better and more important than everybody else. This is a poison infecting people broadly in this country, even among the bitterly oppressed. And there is a great need for people to break with this American chauvinism. Free yourself from the GTF, the great tautological fallacy. A fallacy, an idea or way of thinking that is false, wrong. A tautology, a round in a circle way of reasoning that asserts something and then claims to prove it by merely asserting the same thing again. So the great tautological fallacy to which I am referring is the notion that America is a force for good in the world, and therefore whatever it does is good, or at least done with good intentions, even if the same thing, when done by other forces, especially by forces opposed to us, is bad, is evil, because America is a force for good in the world. Thus, in the grip of the great tautological fallacy, when one is told by the authorities and government and the media, etc., that North Korea developing a small number of nuclear weapons and a few long-range ballistic missiles poses a grave threat, one does not question. One does not ask why that is a grave threat, while the only country ever to use nuclear weapons, the United States, having thousands of nuclear weapons and the capability to use them anywhere in the world, is somehow not a grave threat.
Well, Raymond, very appropriate to that, you wrote in your correspondence that the students asked, well, why can't the imperialists be a force for good? You gave a very substantive answer to that in the article. Could you just briefly convey the basic stand around this?
Yeah, I think people have to understand, and what we're fighting for people to understand, and what people have to sort of open their eyes to, is that this is a system. It operates according to certain rules of the game. And the most fundamental rule of the game is expand or die. This system is made up of competing capitalists. We're talking about corporations, we're talking about banks, we're talking about investment groups, and they are competing for market share. They are competing for more profit, because if they don't constantly expand, then someone else, some other capitalist is going to move in and displace them. And you see this competition at every level of this system, GM and Toyota. You see it when Apple the Apple Corporation is fighting to maintain its dominant position. It's not seeking to make an environmentally sustainable cell phone or a long-lasting one. It's beating the competition, and it is doing that by exploiting and more efficiently exploiting workers. And this competition takes place on the level of national capitalist states, where they're fighting over sources of raw materials, regions, markets. The United States and Russia are fighting over the energy markets in Europe. The United States and China are fighting over high tech. And this competition, this rivalry, actually reaches the level of conflict between nation states, imperialist nation states. It goes to the level of war as to who's going to be the top dog in the world imperialist system. We've seen 2 world wars, and right now another world war is looming. And this is the great danger that people need to face and confront. And on May Day, we say, no U.S.-NATO war with Russia. We say, stop U.S. threats against China, because this competition, this rivalry between these great powers is reaching a breaking point, a point in which they are going towards direct confrontation, which will bring with it the potential for nuclear war and the extinction of the planet itself. And we say this system must go extinct, not humanity.
Well, look, this is very important. It's a ferocious fight. You know, you wrote that the students that you spoke with said, "Oh, but this is different. The people in Ukraine are under assault, and America's righteously answering their call for assistance. And what are you supposed to do when the Ukrainians are being attacked? Just stand by?"
Look, the most important thing we can do is to oppose what the U.S. is doing right now, which is pumping in the weapons, the intelligence, using, as I said, the Ukrainian people as cannon fodder in their contention with Russia. And this is a dangerous situation. It's one that is rapidly escalating, and we have a responsibility here to mobilize people, to go into the streets, to demand that this stop. And that is a demand to be made of the Russian government, Russian imperialists, that it is absolutely essential that this war stop. That is our immediate responsibility. And to do it as part of building for the revolution to overthrow this system, which is the cause of wars like this, which is the cause of the misery on this planet, the suffering on this planet, the destruction of the environment. So we have to be demanding an end to this war. We have to understand that the situation in Ukraine is a situation that is now a trigger point for global confrontation, for war, for world war, for nuclear war. And that is not in the interest of the Ukrainian people or in the interest of the people of the world. What is in the interest is every effort bent to stop this war, and doing that as part of building the revolution to vanquish this system of imperialism and to bring a whole new world into being. And May Day is an opportunity for us to step onto the political stage, to make it emphatically and unambiguously clear that we stand with the people of the world, that we oppose our imperialists, that we are accelerating the conditions to make the revolution that humanity needs. No to U.S.-NATO war against Russia, no to U.S. threats against China. It is this system, not humanity, that must become extinct. And May Day is a punctuation point for delivering that message. And as I said, as it says on the slogans, making it very clear that now is the time to prepare for a real revolution.
Okay, Raymond. So with that, let's wrap this up. Thank you very much once again for being on the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show.
Hey, it was great being here with you, Andy, and we'll be out there May 1st.
Great. Good night. The experience at Columbia University, which revealed the political science students and their professor locked within the thinking, the believing, and then getting belligerent behind the view that whatever its fault, fundamentally the U.S. is the good guys. Such thinking has been fueled by an unrelenting indoctrination and support, even reverence, for the U.S. military. In the interviews the RNL Show did with Bob Avakian this past fall, we asked him about this, and his answer is spot on in relation to what we just heard from Raymond, and it's extremely important for May 1st.
One other follow-up question I want to ask is the kind of questioning and transformation that you're describing, I think was going on among a lot of people at that time. And it is so radically different than the culture right now, which is just suffocating with like reverence for the U.S. military and its role in the world. And thank you for your service at the ball games, in the basketball, in the airports, in the culture very broadly. And you have stressed that this is something that really needs to be sharply taken on. Why do you think that's so important?
Because you're never going to bring about any kind of fundamental change. And certainly you're not going to bring about a revolution when people are still pledging their allegiance in whatever way to this whole imperialist system, and the dominant imperialists in the world, namely the U.S., which wreaks tremendous havoc on people all over the world, causing tremendous suffering, as well as being the major destroyer of the environment. And unless people break with that, no kind of really positive change, and certainly not any fundamental revolutionary change, can possibly take place, and with all this, all this bullshit of, thank you for your service, it reflects the fact that, most people, one thing that we talked about Vietnam, one thing that the ruling class of this country summed up after Vietnam was their army was coming apart at the seams. It was no longer a reliable fighting force by the end of the Vietnam War in the early 70s. And, I myself, on the Berkeley campus and more generally, had a lot of exchanges both with veterans who'd been in Vietnam and also with soldiers who were on leave, who were either like on their way to Vietnam or coming back from Vietnam, because I usually did a year in Vietnam, as I recall. And, they were turning against the war in greater and greater, and partly, because of the struggle we waged with them, but also mainly because of the larger thing going on. Both what was happening in the war and what they were seeing and what they were being forced to do, the atrocities they were being forced to commit, and also the massive opposition to it around the world, but also of great significance in the U.S. itself. And so, at that time, the ruling class summed up, this was an army where we drafted a lot of people. And they had a lot of people in the army who really didn't want to be there in the first place, and who really identified increasingly with the people who were opposing the war. I mean, just to take the moment here, one of the big things, bullshit things that really angers me is all these ruling class figures who say, all these students and everybody else on the college campuses and these elite campuses, all these kids who opposed to Vietnam, they were all just a bunch of spoiled brats. They didn't have to go to Vietnam because they got a student deferment. And, then all the working class and poor kids had to go and fight in Vietnam. The fact is that the strongest opposition to the Vietnam War was among the poor people, among black people, among Latinos. That's where the strongest opposition was. And even the anti-war movement that I was part of, while there were a lot of very large numbers of white middle-class kids and other middle-class kids involved, we were also influenced by people like Stokely Carmichael, and others who were calling out the war as imperialist. So it is just absolute garbage that it was, only these privileged brats who opposed the war. But to get back to the point more directly, the ruling class summed up, this is not a good army for us where we draft people, most of whom come from among the ranks of the oppressed, however they thought of it. But objectively, they came from the ranks of the oppressed. And, we were forcing them to fight in these wars. So they went over to an all-volunteer army. So now the compulsion for people to join is, economic. It's not a draft where you go to jail if you don't answer the call to be in the military. And so, you got a tiny percentage of the population that's in the military, and everybody else doesn't have to go, especially the better off people. And so a lot of this is what we call the parasitism of American imperialism, where you're basically feasting off the people of the world. You're at the high point of the end of the food chain, living off of the women in Bangladesh who are slaving away in garment factories, while, by the way, their country's being engulfed by water because of climate change. Or the children in the Congo who are mining the minerals that go into cell phones and computers and what have you. We're living, in this country, you're living off of that. No matter what part of the society you're in. Yes, the spoils of this, to put it that way, are very unevenly distributed. But there's still a fact that everybody is getting some of those spoils. And so, the way I look at it is a thank you for your services. Thank you, you're doing this so I don't have to do it and I can live off this parasitism that you're out there slaughtering people to make possible.
To bring home all that we have said today and in the previous several shows on the importance of Internationalist May Day 2023, we want to share two more short film clips. The first is from Michelle Chai, a leader of the Revolution Club here in Los Angeles, speaking at last Sunday's picnic, sharing a few of the ways that each of you can build for the May 1st action in your city. Your commitment to come out on Monday and your work to build for it are decisive in these last few days. Following that, we're going to close this part of today's program with Bob Avakian on the emancipation of humanity and internationalism. The whole world comes first. This short clip is from Bob Avakian's dialogue with Cornel West on revolution and religion at Riverside Church in New York City in the fall of 2014.
From now until May 1st, this poster that Noche was holding up, right, has to be up all over in walls all over the city, in different cities, and on social media. People have to see this, and people have to know, and people have to see these slogans and question, okay, what is this, And at the same time as they see a force getting out on the college campuses, getting out in the neighborhoods, right? What Noche was describing, in these neighborhoods where people see this shit, the pigs come down on people on a daily basis and harass them and brutalize them, right? And getting into the Bob Avakian interviews that lays out, right, that vision that, that Noche was talking about around hope, how we see wrenching that, emancipating future out of this horrible, course that it seems like it's going in, right? That it is going in. How we can wrench that positive vision out of this, Bob Avakian lays it out in these interviews. You get a sense of who this leader is. You get a sense of, his love for the masses of people and his deep hatred for the unnecessary suffering that people are going through here and all over the world. And you learn to hate that shit too, just as much as he does. And people should join the Revolution Club. People here that are part of the Revolution Club, as I said, it's a very exciting process where people are coming together and just getting in. It's not a thing where we all sit around and say, okay, we agree. No, moving on. It's we don't agree. Let's open it up. Let's talk about it, and let's and then let's talk about how we're getting out and actually impacting with this revolution, right? So this is the kind of thing I really want to encourage people. Let's get into all these things. And for people in other areas, if you're anywhere near Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Chicago, or New York, get to those May 1st demonstrations. If you're not anywhere near those areas and can't get to those areas, then go to the website revcom.us, download and print these posters with the slogans, "We refuse to accept this system's future. A better world without exploitation and oppression is possible." Hand make signs or banners. Get to your closest busy intersection on May 1st. Gather your friends and get out there with these signs. Take lots of pictures of these of your manifestation and send it to us. And then pull your friends together and tune in to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show.
And we need an orientation or morality and a movement that is internationalist, that proceeds on the understanding that the whole world comes first, not America. And that the fundamental goal The fundamental and ultimate goal is the emancipation of all humanity. What we need is not striving to get ours on the terms and conditions of this system that feeds on the flesh of billions of people throughout the world. Now, if you think I'm exaggerating, let me just cite one example. Many of the clothes we wear and that hang in the closet or whatever come from the country in Asia, Bangladesh. People, including mainly women and many children, are working under the most brutal conditions to produce those clothes. And recently, within the last year, the factories they're working in, where there are no safety regulations, no health considerations, the factories they're working in collapsed, killing large numbers of these women. And then there was a fire and the people working were locked inside the plant while the fire raged. These are the conditions under which the things that this system accumulates are produced all over the world. We don't need to be any part of that. Millions of children in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia die every year from starvation and diseases that could be prevented. Devastation from Ebola and the millions killed by AIDS in Africa is fundamentally because of the legacy of colonialism and slavery and continuing domination by imperialism, above all, U.S. capitalism imperialism. What we need is not a fight to bring yet more brutality, devastation, agony, and heartbreak to the half of humanity that is female and to humanity as a whole in the name of religious fundamentalism, Christian, Islamic, or other, or in the name of a capitalist democracy and a free world that in fact rests and thrives on exploitation and oppression, slaughter and destruction of people and the environment. These cannot be the only choices for humanity. We need a fight to emancipate humanity from all this.
A message to students and others from the Revcoms. The masses of people around the world are suffering terribly. This system is splitting at its seams, and the planet stands at a precipice. What this cries out for is world-changing, not word-changing, heart, not snark, unity, not my identity, emancipation, not cancellation, soaring the heights, not lowering of sights, science and daring, not competing narratives, a real revolution, not an appeal for inclusion. Take to the streets with the Revcoms on May 1st and show up for revolution and a world without oppression and exploitation.
That was a message from the Revcoms to students and others, and we have been taking this message out on college campuses across the country. Sincera Taylor, the co-host of this show, is actually going on a speaking tour on woke lunacy versus real revolution. If you are watching the show live in the premiere and you still have time, if you're in the Bay Area, to make it to Revolution Books in Berkeley, 7 p.m. She's going to be speaking there. And mark your calendar, May 24th at UCLA, there's going to be a major event, Sincera Taylor speaking. So we've been building a team that's been working on this initiative, going out on the campuses, taking on this woke idiocy and this identity politics framework. We've been getting into the works of Bob Avakian on this question, developing materials on it. And one of the things that's been really striking in, as part of this process is almost everyone who's been part of this team has, come up in this identity politics framework, has been surrounded by it, has contended with it, and has had to work their way through it. We wanted to share some of this experience because I think it's very instructive. So we have one of the members of the team, Luna Hernandez. She's also with the Revolution Club in Los Angeles. Welcome to the RNL Show.
Thank you.
So why don't we start with, you were a college student back in the day and, during the time of the murder of Michael Brown and Eric Gardner by the police. And why don't you talk a little bit about what it was like to be part of these identity politics circles at that time?
Yeah, well, at that time, like you said, Michael Brown had just been murdered by the police, and he was the same age as I was. And at that time, and then, they left his body out in the street, and masses of people saw that, and they were jolted with the fact that why are Black people being murdered? And so I had gotten involved in different groups who, at first we were actually mobilizing, protests and against murder by police. But then what ended up happening is that, our sights became very low on, canceling good-hearted white people who were coming forward into the fight, saying that they cannot be a part of the fight, making them cry in some sense. Like, for example, there was this one time where we used to give out or sell these little patches that had the Black Power fist on it, and somebody who wasn't Black bought one, and a friend of mine went and gave her money back and said, "You cannot have this patch. Give it back because it is not yours." And she made this white woman cry and said, "No, I actually want to support. I want to be a part of that." So this became, and there's many examples like that. What ended up happening is that we created a safe space where only Black and brown people were allowed, no white people were allowed, and no even discussion of what the actual reality is of what is the oppression of Black people, how do you put an end to it? Because at certain points, even when white people would come around and talk about the oppression of Black people, it became triggering for, Black people or other people of color. Oh, he's taking up too much space. All of that. When what we need to be doing is everyone actually not only needs to be standing up against this, but looking into, okay, how do you put an end to it? Where does this all of this come from?
And then soon after you met the Revcoms on your college campus. What was that like? Yeah,
so again, I was looking for a way to act after I transferred to an elite college. And I was looking at all of these different groups on campus, my first week of school, and no one was really catching my eye. I was trying to act against this brutal form of oppression of murder by police. And then, out of nowhere, I see the Revcoms. They're out there with a gigantic Stolen Lives banner with basically pictures of people who have been brutally murdered by the police, their faces of when they were alive. And I was very impacted by that because that's what was going on and is still going on, And they were out there disrupting the air, they were on a bullhorn and they were really kind of piercing through, the normalcy of this form of oppression and really the silence on it too. So I was very attracted to that at first, but I think what, even got me more serious about being a part of the movement for revolution was getting into basics, the talks and writings of Bob Avakian, was actually understanding and coming together with a very diverse group of people, coming together to really wrangle with, okay, where does the oppression of Black people come from? We talked about slavery and okay, there's a whole transformation to where this came from. And they were coming, forward with the fact that people from many different experiences with many different identities can actually understand that not only this form of oppression, but male supremacy, the destruction of our planet, are actually rooted in a system of capitalism, imperialism. And, you know, getting into Bob Avakian, getting into the analysis of what is capitalism and how do you overthrow that system. And I remember I read Basics, and I read this article in it called a supplement called A Leap of Faith, A Leap to Rational Knowledge, two very different kinds of leaps, two radically different worldviews and methods. And he makes the example about the Big Bang theory and evolution. And essentially how I understood it is like, you know, the Big Bang theory and evolution, they were actually social phenomena, or they were a phenomenon that actually happened. And you can use science, you can use evidence, you can use investigation to research it and to actually prove that it's true and that it happened. And it wasn't based on, you know, nobody directly experienced the millions of years of evolution, you know, or directly witnessed it. Just like, you know, just because you directly experience oppression because you are of an oppressed identity or an oppressed nationality, doesn't mean you know where that oppression comes from or how to put an end to it. That actually requires science. That requires going beneath the surface, breaking out of just perceiving your own identity and looking at reality and looking at, okay, what is the actual problem here and what's the solution? To put an end to all forms of oppression is what kind of, you know, shifted me from like, okay, yeah, these people actually have a solution and they're serious and they're going out there challenging people to engage with that, to engage with reality as it actually is. Whereas the group that I was a part of was basing themselves on their identity and just what you directly experience. And that's what's true versus your, you know, direct experience with oppression, you know, doesn't actually determine where it comes from or how it doesn't, you know, fundamentally help you understand where does it come from and how to put an end to it. That requires science. Basically what's changed from then to now is that the situation in the world has actually gotten more intense. When I was coming up in this framework, Trump had just got elected. Now you have a whole Republican Party who is very hardcore fascist, openly white supremacists and male supremacists. And so that's on the one hand. But then on the other hand, you look at, along with this intensity of the situation, the overturning of Roe versus Wade happened last year, which is a norm that these fascists are actually shredding, as well as the enslavement of women. So again, like the normalcy is being ripped up and the democratic norms are being ripped up. But in the face of this, you know, in the face of these attacks on abortion, what ended up happening is instead of, you know, the woke identity politics framework that was setting the terms, instead of actually talking about the oppression of women and the fact that the attack on abortion has everything to do with about the enslavement of women, there was a real erasure of women, where women were just being called, you know, people with uteruses, chest feeders, all of that. And, you know, that wasn't the case when I was coming up in this framework. When we talked about abortion, it was a white woman's issue. And that's even wrong too, because it affects all women. But it was still a woman's issue. But now this attack on abortion is not even a woman's issue anymore. It's again, like a people with uteruses issue. And in the name of inclusion, there is a real erasure of women. And if you don't name what this attack on abortion actually is, you're not going to be able to fight it in the way that's necessary. This Christian fascist assault on abortion and women, you know, and then in the name of inclusion, erasing women, when you do that, you actually further that fascist nightmare. And that's something that has become, you know, very different and very virulent and very harmful. And I also think what has changed is the cancel culture and the real teardown culture that has really set the day, in which there has become an atmosphere where instead of getting into big questions that are affecting, you know, humanity and what direction humanity is going to go in, conversations are stifled, are quelled because people are intimidated and are bullied to, into thinking that they might say something that's wrong or that's offensive to somebody. And we saw that too in, the attacks on Rise Up for Abortion Rights, where, we got severely attacked by the woke, mob and framework, in the sense of when we used bloody imagery to display what happens to women when they don't have the right to abortion. And when we use coat hang imagery, it was deemed as triggering or traumatic, and you can't do that. That's too much. That's going to frighten people. Instead of actually confronting, no, this is the actual reality of what happens when the right to abortion is taken away. Women die, and women have died. So we're not going to erase that history. That's why we did it. And I think, this, again, paired with the erasure of women, all these accusations of transphobia, that now to even talk about women is deemed transphobic. When, look, we do need to fight for trans people. Trans people need the right to abortion. And the attacks on trans people are coming from the same Christian fascist movement that's on a mission to enslave women. But it's not transphobic to talk about women, and we can't pit these two, forms of oppression against each other. And one of the most ugliest, and virulent attacks on Rise Up for Abortion Rights, and in particular the Revcoms, was the attacks on BA, on Bob Avakian, at a time when things are becoming so sharp in society, and people need to be looking at getting into BA, getting into what he's actually brought forward, and the analysis of why this attack on abortion is even happening. No one else is giving that analysis, and yet this leader was actually attacked in a time when people need to be getting into this leader, because there really is no other analysis, and there is no other leader who's actually putting forward a strategy, not only to put an end to the oppression of women and the attacks on abortion, but as part of putting an end to all forms of oppression and exploitation. Instead of, from Bob Avakian on instead of snarking and sniping each other and being divided by identities, what people need to be doing is uniting all who can be united against, all forms of oppression in order to end that oppression. Because that's the point. We can't keep, navel gazing and trying to own our different oppressions. We have to put an end to it. And that is going to require an actual revolution. So I think now is the time to get serious. And so that's where I think, this framework and what it has transformed into has really become very, very harmful.
Yeah. So I want to call on everyone watching this to come out on May 1st to be part of putting this revolution on the map, bringing forward an actual force for revolution, in these times. At the same time, I also want to call on people to contribute, to support, to donate to this initiative and the speaking tour that Sansara Taylor's launching, that Luna is part of helping organize, to go out and take on this woke lunacy and contrast it, on these take it on these college campuses and contrast it with the real revolution that's needed, and to pierce this dominance of this woke identity politics, the way it poses as the only alternative to this fascism, the only alternative to this racism and misogynist society, and bring forward what really is the answer to this in revolutions. So I want to thank you for coming on the RNL Show, Luna, and sharing your experience and your thoughts.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of this, the 145th episode of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show on April 27th, 2023. We're just a few days out from May Day, and it's important to get your thinking, your comments, your questions, as well as your answers to the questions in the quizzes that I asked earlier in the comments below. The more we get controversy going in those comments, the more people will be involved in the show itself. They argue with us, argue with each other. And a very important part of building the community around the show is our Patreon program. It's where you support the show financially, and more than that, you become part of a community that's spreading this show, talking about this show, contributing to the show. Overall, that's very key to how we're going to actually prepare for making revolution. And last, in terms of community, it's really critical that people start watching this show with others. Watch the show with a friend, your partner. Watch it with a group of people. Organize the showing for it, and then discuss it, and then let us know what you've discussed. Around this show can spring up circles and clubs and movements around this new communism developed by Bob Avakian and for this revolution. This is one important way where the Revcoms, who today are small and mainly located in a few cities and principally here in Los Angeles, can spread our tentacles around the country and bring people forward into the movement for an actual revolution. And let this May Day be the launch of all of that. And so with that, I'm going to say goodnight for myself, for Sansara Taylor, for the entire RNL Revolution Nothing Less crew, and say that we're going to see you next Thursday night, as always, at 5 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So good night, and see you on May 1st.